My name is Paul Lachelier. I'm the founder and the director of Learning Life, and the co-chair of the Citizen Diplomacy Research Group. You will see here in the Zoom chat that we have two presentations today. Catherine Brown from the president and the CEO of Global Ties US, and then myself. I'll be presenting excuse me, on family diplomacy, and Catherine will be presenting on the Global Ties network, as well as the research that Global Ties is doing. So both of our presentations will involve, to some extent, discussion of research, but also of our programs. That will be followed by questions and discussion, which will take about 35 minutes. And then we'll be finishing with announcements, including the most up-to-date CD bulletin, Citizen Diplomacy Bulletin, and then announcements, any announcements that all of you have. I would encourage you, if you have announcements of citizen diplomacy research or citizen diplomacy initiatives, to share those or prepare those for announcements. Again, all this information will be going out to the larger email list, as well as a video recording. This meeting is indeed being video recorded. And so we'll have a video recording, photos, the agenda, and the Zoom chat from this meeting go out to the larger CDRG list. So please, as I mentioned, introduce yourselves. You may also, before I jump into my own presentation, you may wish to think of questions that you have for myself and Catherine as you go, and write those questions into the Zoom. Try to be as thoughtful as possible, not just, this is great, love your presentation, but actually if you have deeper questions for us, we'd really appreciate a kind of substantive discussion rather than just praise for our presentations. Okay, so let me get some water. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and introduce you guys to the work of the Family Diplomacy Initiative, which is part of Learning Life. And Debbie, are you keeping time?
Yes.
Awesome, great. Thanks for doing so. Okay, so everybody can see this? Great. What I'm going to be telling you about is the Family Diplomacy Initiative. It's a flagship program of Learning Life. And I'm going to start with some kind of basic information you all know, you're all aware of, but I think it helps to kind of place our work in perspective. The first thing is, and I just checked these numbers this morning, actually, to update them. The US is on track to become majority minority around 2045. Last time I had this up, it was 2050. So we are quickly moving in the direction of a more diverse country and faster. And that includes by immigration as well. So we're anticipated to be 18% immigrant by 2065, which would be the most diverse we've ever been in US history. And in broader international perspective, of course, there are a number of rising powers, the BRICS, the United Nations, and others. More goods and services we use are made abroad. I like to mention that I once picked up a bottle of juice, looked at the ingredients, and the juice came from like Israel, Argentina, and two other countries across the world. And that's just one among many examples of the ways in which our lives are intertwined economically. And then lastly, of course, the pandemic makes it most obvious. We face a number of international issues that underscore that we live in a very interdependent and increasingly interdependent world. So given that context, the question that we ask is, how do we nurture caring, capable global citizens rather than xenophobic nationalists? We say this in part because of in light of authoritarian resurgence in the United States and abroad. And so our answer is in part in our programming. So very briefly, Learning Life is an educational nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., founded in 2012. Our core focus is to spread learning in everyday life beyond school walls. And the reason for this is animated essentially by concern about inequality and rising inequality in the world, and the sense that education should not be limited to what happens in schools, because inequality is generated substantially in families and communities. So a lot of our work is focused on creating innovative learning communities that are inexpensive or free for people to engage in throughout their lives. And so our three programs are best understood as such, as learning communities. And they are the Family Diplomacy Initiative, the International Mentoring Program, and our Democracy Dinners here locally in Metro Washington, D.C. I'm going to focus today on just the Family Diplomacy Initiative, but you can learn more about our work later. For those of you who are not muted, if you could just mute yourself, Peter, I just muted you, but just make sure you're muted. So a little bit more information about the Family Diplomacy Initiative. It was established in 2016. Our vision is a world more connected and caring because in every family, there's at least one family diplomat. And those family diplomats are advocating in governments, in nonprofits and businesses for the needs, the concerns, and the aspirations of families, right? We're trying to, in some sense, kind of invigorate a sense of the family as a civic agent in the world. And so our goals are not only more caring, capable, and connected global citizens, but empowering families to participate in governance at local to international levels. And what we do is global family dialogues, which I think a couple of you might have participated in, but also storytelling, which we're going to be doing increasingly. I'm not going to get into the phases of our development much, other than to tell you that we are currently in the connect and learn phase. Next year, we're going to be doing more of the voice and advocate, but happy to discuss that further during the discussion. So why family diplomacy? Currently, there's lots of international exchange, but a lot of that in the international education space is school to school and person to person, or student to student. And there's not, and as far as we know, and please enlighten me if that's not the case, but there's not, as far as we know, family to family exchange cross-nationally. Second, focusing on family makes international relations more personal, comprehensible, and engaging. Third, it can increase parents and children's knowledge of and interest and skill in engaging with our diverse world, in part because of that accessibility of understanding family, as opposed to the structure of the United Nations, power relations between countries, or international commodity flows. Fourth, this is an opportunity for us through family diplomacy to bring parents and children closer together, to reinforce school learning, and to reduce the rather sharp inequalities that exist between families of different socioeconomic statuses. Five, and I've alluded to this earlier, in trying to make families agents, active agents for a more caring world, we're trying to move away from this concept of families as kind of this haven in a heartless world where people go to hide from the world, but rather as a place where people engage with the world. And last, because we believe that representation of families in governments, business, and nonprofits will better serve the public, will make for more responsive governments, nonprofits, and businesses. So to make things a little fun, I'm going to run quickly through a few photos. We started in 2016 with very small scale interactions between lower income families in Senegal, Jordan, and the United States. And so this is an example where we actually showed up in the home of a lower income family in Maryland, and then projected on screen a group of families in El Salvador. We did dialogues in libraries. In this case, this was dialogue in a DC library with a family in Senegal, and in community centers in Southeast DC. This was a particular dialogue with a family in Jordan and a group of families here in DC. And we talked about a variety of things. Our kids were asking, like, we're asking really basic questions like, do you have a smartphone? What does your smartphone look like? So in this case, this guy in Senegal is showing us his phone. A family in Jordan shared the fruit of their work on a farm where they live in Jeddah, Jordan. And in some cases, it led to dance. And you notice here that this woman from El Salvador has actually took the care to wear an American flag and show us some of the dances in El Salvador with her partner. Since then, we've scaled up to some extent to larger international dialogues. And this is an example. We had a series of 6 live international dialogues this year focused on the question of what does it take to have safe, healthy families worldwide. And this was our last dialogue in November, which focused on the ways in which education and leisure impact family health. So we've also, because our work is primarily on Facebook, we have families, and we're rapidly expanding on Facebook. We're approaching 10,000. We expect to reach 10,000 by the end of this month, people across the world in the group. People are introducing themselves wherever they are in the world. This father's in Senegal is introducing his family, and there are a number of others you can see at our website. We also engage in actual interchange asynchronously through the Facebook group. So in this case, it's of interchange between different family members about breakfast in different countries. And we also are trying to get families and family members to begin to think of themselves as family diplomats. And one of the ways in which we do that is to articulate, why would you want to identify yourself as a family diplomat? And this family from Mexico indicated, because we appreciate, celebrate, and respect human and family diversity. So I'm going to finish off with reflections. How much time do I have, Debbie? 3 minutes? Okay, great. So here's what we measure. And I want to preface this by saying that obviously we're aware of this for better and for worse. And I want to emphasize here the better in our case. Online is a rich a source of data, words, interactions, photos, video, and worldwide. And so it's a tremendous opportunity, because our work is focused in online interchange, to gather a tremendous amount of rich data for research purposes on citizen diplomacy. That said, our research right now is quite focused. We currently do pre and post surveys with FDI, Family Diplomacy Initiative participants. And we focus our research on these variables, as sociologists would call, or social scientists would call them: project-specific knowledge, interest in world affairs, growth in tolerance for difference, and warmth towards foreign populations. So in the pre-tests and the post-tests, we're looking to measure, essentially ask the same questions and see if we've had an impact by measuring the difference between pre and post-tests, between the before and after the projects that we do. This is an example of one of our survey questions, and it's a series of statements, and we ask them to give us their sense. And here we're trying to measure, can we move the needle with our programming in terms of increasing tolerance and increasing, you might say, cosmopolitanism or internationalism as opposed to nationalism, through these, what we hope are somewhat subtle questions. The this is just an indication of the impact that we've had in the last project that we conducted in 2020. We're still not completed with the project this year. So I'm giving you the results from last year. We saw a 7% decrease in participants' feelings of national superiority and discomfort with cultural difference, a 5 to 9% increase in their warmth towards foreign populations, in particular foreign populations, and a substantial increase in the warmth of those who felt the coldest towards certain foreign populations at the start in the pre-test or pre-survey. So here's where I finish with a couple of slides. Here are the research challenges. These are not all the research challenges that we find, but obviously small staff means smaller studies. We are a tiny organization. It's myself working full time with about 60 volunteers. And so a lot of our work and a lot of work of research is actually recruiting participants and making sure that people actually participate in the surveys. And so that takes a lot of time. It's not just the design, it's just getting the word out. I note here that a lot of, and I can go into this in more detail in the discussion, but in terms of the methods, in my experience on citizen diplomacy research, the gold standard of experimental design is very rare. And for good reason. It's more time consuming to do at a larger scale, which is more expensive.
Just 1 minute, Paul. Thank you.
The pre and post surveys are uncommon, which is what we do, but have a certain advantage of being able to compare before and after. And what's most common, unfortunately, are these kind of facile post surveys where people are basically asked after the fact, hey, what did you learn? How did you like it, et cetera, and so forth. There's some value to that, but it's fairly superficial information. There is a conflict of interest issue, which is that we currently, and a lot of nonprofits, do their own research, and that's not a good idea. It's better to have an independent organization doing the research. And then there's this fundamental tension which always exists between quantity versus quality. There are more participants, and if you have more participants, generally speaking, that means less information gathered from each, and vice versa. So last slides are some possible solutions to this. One is to systematize. There already exists this. In fact, Catherine, I think, is going to mention this when she goes into her research, because she's collaborating with the Public Diplomacy Council. No, I'm not the public, the USC Public
Center on Public
School.
Diplomacy.
Yes, Center for Public Diplomacy. Thank you. On precisely this, on trying to get collaboration, but there's a heck of a lot that universities could be doing to systematize that and engage far more nonprofits. And I can go into that in detail as a former professor on that detail. Two is incentivizing collaboration, which is to mean funding organizations and networks that foster research and learning and collaboration, like the CDRG. And lastly, incentivizing research training, because a lot of staff of nonprofits do not have all that much training in research. It behooves us and it behooves organizations to invest in that training to produce better quality data in citizen diplomacy studies. All right, I'm done. Thanks, and on to Catherine. I'm going to exit my screen and allow, oops, excuse me. Trying to exit my screen. Hold on a second. And allow Catherine to present. Hold on a second. Okay, Catherine, you should be able to present.
All right. Okay, here we go. Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here for the first time with you all and to meet you, Paul, and that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you for sharing. It's for such a small team, it's really impressive the scale of work, but also the depth of the work that you've been doing. And I have some really wonderful people in the audience who know Global Ties quite well. Two of my board members, Barb Keller and Patricia Harrison, and our dear colleague, Mark Repstock at Meridian, who worked at Global Ties when it was NCIB and was a leader in the organization. So I will try to quickly go through kind of who we are and what we do, and then try to spend a little bit more time on the research we're trying to do. But please do keep in mind that the challenges that Paul identified are very real with regard to conducting research on this work, and that we're constantly looking, for ways to improve. And that COVID has been a big disruptor in that. So what is Global Ties? We're celebrating 60 years this year, which is hard to believe. We were founded 60 years ago, and we had this quote from President Kennedy about our founding, which is that he really believed that increased participation by Americans in international exchange will help achieve common hope for a durable and just peace. We were created to support the International Visitor Leadership Program, which is celebrating 81 years, really the foundational professional exchange program, setting a standard worldwide for what this work should be. And really it was formed during World War II with this conviction that we can build stronger alliances through our citizens. And that is exactly what the Global Ties Network was built to support. And we feel that we have been leveraging international exchange to build those alliances, tackle our toughest challenges through our citizens. And really something about the network that I'll talk about is that it's grown from a really vast network of mostly volunteers, to really being mostly professionals. And that's something that's been really encouraging, is seeing the professionalization of citizen diplomacy. Awesome. Nationwide. So our mission, we changed it this year to more accurately reflect where the organization has gone and the work that we do. It is powering individuals, communities, and nations to build trust and to advance peace and prosperity through international exchange. We really believe that building trust is the center of all relationships, and that's the business that we're in. You can read more about us and watch our video on our website, but I will to save time, I will pass through this. So what does Global Ties US do? We see ourselves as powering a nationwide network of nonprofit organizations that focus on citizen diplomacy. So you can kind of think of our work and across these three pillars. We think we do capacity and community building work amongst our network. And I'll share more about who makes up our network in a minute. We do a lot of training. We're doing one right now this week, a virtual programmers workshop on diversity and exchanges. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility and justice have been really central to our work this year, and making sure that our network reflects America, just not just geographically, but in all the other wonderful ways that makes America unique, and that we're openly grappling with issues like, confronting racism and advancing social justice. And so that's been a huge part of our work, and that will continue to be. And so that's part of our training. We've also focused a lot this last year on preparing our network for virtual exchanges, which has, been quite a pivot. And now we're starting to look at, okay, what does a return to in-person programming look like as well? So a lot of our resources go into that. We do events. We do have our virtual event this week. We have our national meeting that we do every year, and that's going to be focused in 2022 on the core IVLP programmers and executives. But that is usually a way for us to convene the larger public diplomacy, international affairs community around citizen diplomacy. And we have a lot of communications with our network, several different touch points throughout the week, and a lot of ongoing one-on-one communication to really build community amongst the network. A lot of what we do and a lot of the research work I'm going to talk about is really focused on our advocacy work, because more than 90% of our funding and a huge part of the funding of our members is federal. So we want to make sure there's a robust educational and cultural exchange budget in the international affairs budget. And we also want to make sure that exchanges in the public diplomacy budget is healthy beyond the ECE budget. So we have targeted calls to action. One of the things about our network members, one of their superpowers is really that they're constituents. And unlike us in DC, we spend a lot of time with the professional committee staffers at the relevant committees for public diplomacy and international exchange, but we don't really have, we can't call ourselves constituents to senators, you know, and beyond Rep. Norton. So we do a lot of calls to action with the network, and we really encourage them doing year-round relationship building with their congressional delegations. And then we also provide growth opportunities to really grow their nonprofits, and we increasingly want them to be the infrastructure for public diplomacy in the United States. So that starts with our core foundational work, the International Visitor Leadership Program. We pass through funding to our members through something called the Community Partnership Grant to be in a strong place to implement IVLP. We also have expanded our program work in the last few years. And so we have supported the USA Pavilion at Expo 2020 Dubai, ensuring there's a strong citizen diplomacy representation at the pavilion, which we see as being a premier public diplomacy platform. In January, we're going to be ramping up our work to support the State Department with outreach to US alumni of exchange programs. And then we also do various exchanges. Our principle is that by pursuing these growth opportunities, any new business that comes in the Globalized US, we want to be able to pass on to our members, and we want to help build up their revenue and build their organizations to be stronger citizen diplomacy organizations. Advocacy, just a little bit more. We really do want to focus on this year round. Of course, as we know, one of the big challenges is getting a federal budget passed on time. And so that is something that the network is focused on right now, is getting that fiscal year 2022 budget passed. And then also the network has also taken a great interest, as you can imagine, in a lot of Afghan alumni of our exchange programs and ensuring their welfare. And so that's become a big advocacy point for the organization as well. This is what our network, our nationwide network looks like. There's 84 currently. They're not in all 50 states, but they do programming in all 50 states. The State Department does choose kind of which cities need to be represented. And so we also have some other members who don't do IVLP, but who are part of our network and do other exchange programming. So we have 99 domestic members and 23 international members and affiliates. So that covers programming in all 50 states, and then our international members and affiliates, which are mostly alumni of IVLP and other exchanges, are in over 40 countries. Also, you know, I've been focusing on our community-based members, but we also have 8 national program agency partners who implement IVLP because it's such a massive program. So that is like World Learning, Institute of International Education, Cultural Vistas, Meridian, and there's a few more: Graduate School USA, Mississippi Consortium for National Development, FHI 360. I think I got them all, but they are also part of our community and our network, and really we want to build community between them and all the community partners that implement IVLP. So these are our national programming agencies. I forgot this slide was in there. Also CRDF Global is when I left out. And these are all of our community-based members. I am not going to go through them all, but you might catch that there's a lot of overlap between them and the World Affairs Councils. So this is how our network looks. The majority of our network are mid-sized. That's 64% of the network. Their annual revenue is, you know, below $350,000 a year. 20% of our members, their annual revenue is above $500,000 a year. So that is kind of a big gap between those two. And that is 20% of the network. You might recognize some of those logos there at the bottom. These are big groups: Global Minnesota, World Oregon, World Chicago. And then we have all volunteer organizations. That's 16% of the network. And that's originally how the network started. And so you see that there's been a big shift towards professionalization, and we spend a lot of time with the mid-sized member organizations trying to help them to grow. And this is the impact. And so when we're talking about kind of why the focus on community-based members, this is what they're able to do when visitors come to the United States for IVLP or also for other exchange programs. The focus of our community-based members is to really give them an authentic, meaningful experience in their cities and communities, because they're often going to places that, maybe they didn't know that they wanted to go to. I was talking to a lot of IVLP alum and goes, wow, I never thought I'd go to Kansas City, but really, I began to understand America when I went to Kansas City, or I didn't really want to go to Boise, but that's where I really started to understand the United States better. And so they provide professional meetings, to make sure they're building a peer network in their field of study in these cities. They do a lot of cultural immersion. A key part of that has been this hospitality dimension. We're especially for our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, we're kind of rethinking that right now. Who are we reaching out to make sure that all of America is represented, and that our visitors are building relationships across, a variety of demographics in the United States. They do group team building work and also the synthesis and closing activities. So they're really focused on providing meaningful relationships, and they also spend a lot of time interacting with alumni afterwards. So really quickly, for the economic impact, this is something we focus on a lot for our advocacy work, because one of the most powerful talking points that we have is that, the educational cultural exchange budget, and particularly the IVLP program, that's money that we invest back in the United States because the visitors spend so much time in the United States. And so we talk about how, in 2019, the last year we have economic impact data, that 5 million in federal funds for the IVLP that we passed through to the network resulted in $63 million for the American economy, because so much money was spent in these cities via hotels, ground transportation, meals, to keep this program running. And so this is usually a really, really powerful talking point, and one that we, based on financial data that we collect each year through something called the end of year report. But I think for this group, kind of what's more interesting is really looking at sociocultural impact. And so also through the end of year report, we have these outputs, right? It's numbers. It looks impressive, but we—
Excuse me, Catherine, about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And perfect timing. So it looks really impressive that we have, the network has engaged nearly 29,000 volunteers, doing community service, which is a big part of the visitor experience. These home hospitality dinners, more than 2,000 of them, these cultural events, and these professional appointments scheduled. So by the numbers, it looks impressive, but something that we've, been wanting to do more is to think a little bit more deeply about what this kind of sociocultural local impact really is. And so a few years ago, we engaged the USC Center on Public Diplomacy to build a local impact model. And as you can imagine, with methodology kind of at the scale that it needs to be for our network, takes a long time to develop. And so over the course of about 2 to 3 years, USC CPD worked with a few of our community-based members to understand what would be a viable methodology that wouldn't add a lot of labor, but would give us richer insights into how the community is affected by these exchanges. Like, what's the value that American communities take away from visitors coming to their cities? As you can imagine, the State Department has a whole other operation on understanding the impact of these programs on the visitors and the impact of these programs on the missions and the foreign policy objectives. We wanted to look deeper at the impact on American communities. And so, some of the early findings, and I don't have anything quantitative to share, but some of the early findings from this model was that it has positive effects across 4 areas. One is strengthening cultural competence. Another is increasing community integration. Another is enhancing local workforce development, also providing greater opportunity for international connectivity and networking. So I will say that this essentially ended, though, in 2019, also with COVID, because we were trying to bring it to scale. The plan for 2020 was to bring it to scale. and start ensuring that there was a kind of an easy to follow methodology for all of our members to look into this more deeply with their resources and their volunteers. That had to be put on hold because the programming ended. But we are now kind of looking at how to adapt to this this new environment where we're going to both have virtual programming and in person, and try to have a scalable methodology next year. And so, and when we do have that scalable methodology, I think we'll have some richer findings of what things look like across the country. So really just take these findings with a grain of salt, because I will just say, I'll just close that what Paul said about you know, the challenges of doing this research just are very, very real. And one of the main challenges is getting to have a methodology that is implemented the same across the country by our different organizations, knowing that they have different levels of capability, and knowing that, you know, they don't want to ask too much of their resources and their volunteers. They're already engaging with these visitors, so kind of having them sit down and do a focus group or fill out a survey is another, you know, ask of their time. And so we're trying to find a balance, and that's our current dilemma. But I believe that's all I have. Yeah. So any questions, this is how to get a hold of me. That is my mobile phone number. If you call the Globalize US office right now, we're pretty disrupted, so it'll be hard to get a hold of me, but that's myself. And I'll just stop there.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. So we've got about 15 minutes before Catherine needs to leave for a staff meeting. So we're going to focus our questions first on Catherine. Thanks to those of you in the Zoom chat who, oh, somebody is not on mute. If those of you ask questions of Catherine in the Zoom chat, if you could please chime in, let us know what you'd like to ask. And feel free to comment as well.
I think we've got some questions in the chat, Paul, to get us going.
Yeah, so I guess what I'll do is just is run into Giles, who's joining us from the Netherlands. Is asking about when and whether the report would be made public. I'll add to that, Catherine. I guess what I'm wondering, and I don't know if you cover, I apologize if I missed this in your presentation, but what exactly is being implemented through your essentially your city level partners? I guess it's a survey instrument that you guys have delivered to these local partners, and they're supposed to implement it with individual participants, or are they? Yeah, if you could just go into a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So that's kind of what I was hinting at by saying we're trying to figure out scalable methodology, kind of easy to use. Is that, as we know, surveying, you know, is very useful to you know, to have quantitative findings, but also because they can be easy to fill out. But I am biased because I'm a communication scholar, and my research has been done through in-depth interviewing. So I also know like the real value of in-depth interviewing and qualitative analysis. So we're trying to figure out through this methodology, is it going to be a survey which would be easier for our members to distribute to the community members that they engage. We call them resources and volunteers. Resources are professional resources, people who meet with visitors because they're in the same field and they want to learn from one another. And volunteers are folks who help with the cultural immersion part. You know, they host them for dinner, for a meal, for coffee, have conversations with them. And so, do we give them the survey? Do we also have focus groups? Do we ask our members to do in-depth interviewing? They don't have quite the skill sets to do that. So that is what we're trying to figure out right now. And our colleague Jay Wong at USC-CPD is probably in a better position to explain where this is going. And I think the question of the report is that until we have this methodology figured out, and until the network is in a good place to start implementing it, we won't have the findings. So this is really a long-term project that's going to take a couple of more years, because we really, really want to get this right. We could we weren't really we weren't interested in kind of creating a superficial study. We wanted to really create a methodology that would stick with this network and have findings that could be comparable over time and kind of create a new benchmark for how we look at the impact of citizen diplomacy inside the United States. So with COVID really disrupted things. The network's focus right now is on trying to create a new normal. So to kind of add this on, it would not work.
So Giles, it's going to take a couple of years before you get some answers here. Carson had a really good question. Carson, I'm wondering if you want to articulate it rather than having me read it. Oh, is Carson still with us? I'm trying to see.
Yes, I just had to maneuver to an unmutable location.
Okay.
I would only clarify further by giving my personal example. I work in the field of America-China relations, and in the past couple of years, the wind's really been taken out of our sails. It's easy to perceive across my own community that lots of people have left the field. And there's clearly a sense of dismay and wondering about the future, but there's so much that we can all bring to conversation. And so your perspective as Global Ties, I'd be curious to know, but I don't want to focus the question on America-China. I just have a sense that you would say that you've noticed that there's less activity in that area of NGO work within the Global Ties network, but it may be that you haven't seen a decrease and there may be an increase in some other relationship. So I was curious, that's the context of what I'm asking.
Yeah, Carson, that's a great question. I think, for the work that we do in particular, because we were created to be a State Department partner, we really follow the lead of where the State Department kind of exchanges programs are going. And so when I ran the Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy, there's this old saying in government, show me your budget, I'll tell you your strategy. And if you looked at kind of where public diplomacy resources were going the most, it was China, Russia, Egypt, Israel, Afghanistan, Pakistan, mostly, I think in South Africa, and Brazil. And so I haven't seen kind of the most recent ACPD report to kind of understand the kind of where the most public diplomacy resources, both EC, Educational Cultural Exchange budget, and also all the other public diplomacy budgets in the IA budget, kind of where things are going. But I'll tell you that for Global Ties US and for our network implementing IVLP, the State Department, the ECA Bureau decides really kind of which countries that they're putting an emphasis on, and that also depends on the budgets that, of course, public affairs sections have, to kind of send professionals on these exchanges. So I would actually, I don't want to put on the spot my colleagues, Mark Repstock and Patricia Harrison, but I think I just did. Are you seeing more or less programs coming from China? Because the programming kind of begins with these organizations.
Hi, Catherine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm juggling a couple meetings. So your question was whether we're seeing programs from China, virtual programs, you mean, or?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. They've been extremely problematic, to be frank. It is difficult for Chinese people to participate when they are being monitored. And so they were slow to start with virtual programs. And they've been not very well received. The participants have reported that they've been visited after participating, and consequently they don't really feel free to participate and or to speak freely on the projects. We've received feedback that's part of why they are reluctant, and it does take some work on the State Department's part to fill those programs. So they're fewer and farther in between, and I'm not sure what will happen in the next year, but it is difficult. Is there a part of your question I missed at the beginning, or does that help provide some context?
I think that does.
I would just add to that I think that's a function, as Patricia's saying, of the pandemic transition to virtual. Pre-pandemic, I think the China portfolio was pretty robust, and there were definitely in-person programs coming from China and quite a few up until the pandemic sort of shut things down. So I think China was certainly a priority up to that point. I don't have the numbers to know where it ranked in terms of 2018, 2019, whether China was in the first, second, third, or fourth position, but it was certainly a priority country, I think.
Yeah, and I guess it speaks to perhaps engaging, I would imagine, with diaspora communities when there's difficulty with engaging with people in China proper. And so perhaps there's opportunity there, I would imagine. So we have several hands up, Debbie, and then Aaron, and then Peter.
Thanks. So trying to tie a little bit together both Paul's and Catherine's presentations, there is this mention of, partnerships with research universities, with universities and other research institutes. And of course, USC's Center on Public Diplomacy is one such animal. So with Jay Wang and others at CPD, Catherine, is it possible to take advantage of their network of academic ties, institutional ties across the globe to sort of level the playing field among your members, your member organizations, so you can start to take advantage of some of those opportunities for doing the deep qualitative scholarship that you're known for and that I aspire to.
Oh no, thank you. It's a great point. I think what this really comes down to is also funding, and it's if we were to spread this out to to engage kind of the larger academic network kind of around measurement evaluation, like we do work with other partners, and I on the exchange programs that we implement. And I'm really sorry, but I don't have that in front of me, and my colleague is out today. And I could cite the other. I think we work with, we definitely work with the academic in, I think, the SUNY system in New York. And so there's others, but it's fee for service, so it's funding and using them. And so when I say kind of scalable, like finding something that is scalable and consistent too, then ultimately we will need to put our member organizations like in the driver's seat to collect that data. And so, but it's a great idea, and we'll keep trying to iterate and and innovate as we go, because things keep changing and there's always new ideas. And so it's a great idea. Thank you.
So Catherine has just a couple more minutes before she needs to go. So I'm hoping that the upcoming questions are quick and focused on her presentation. Aaron?
Yeah, actually, I can do it as let me throw it out there, and Catherine, we can follow up later. But to both of you, thank you. It's rare to be in a meeting where you feel like, oh, I've got something that can be helpful to both the presenters or what's going on. The question I have for you, Catherine, and maybe for a subsequent meeting, but the pandemic clearly has shaken up this sector too. You all are part of the leaders of this sector that's been tried and true. And at the risk of being successful, we also tend to be insular, and we create our own little mafias or ghettos or people who do so. I was just wondering, actually, if the last year at Global Ties, and Paul, this is also for you, if there's this new actor that's come out of the blue in the next normal or better normal. In all the other industries I'm working with, I find that there's been a new actor that's been a good, we needed them, but they were brought in. I was just wondering if Global Ties has found that, or if you've if there's a new aspiring star that we in the community through grants or just friendship, if we could be helpful to.
Do you mean like an individual or an organization?
I mean, more an organization or a platform. But I mean, again, if any work has been shooken, to its core, it's been you, right? I mean, this sort of idea, both from restrictions, how things work. I mean, you've had to rethink the model while keeping the model relevant and going. I was just wondering if there was a new up and coming partner in that list that you've said, yeah, these people are worth all of us as a public diplomacy community, investing in and supporting.
It's a great question. My instinct is that like there hasn't really been anything like new. I think what's impressed me is it's not like a new actor. It's like the new thinking of the actors that we work with. I think that the innovation that the State Department, especially the ECA Bureau, has embraced has been remarkable. The leadership and kind of in leading organizations to kind of think boldly and move forward and embrace this, as a creating a new normal has been fantastic. I think, some of the wonderful work coming out of World Learning under Patricia's leadership has been incredible. The frameworks and tools, for us understanding the logic models around exchanges and how that's adapted to virtual. I think what Meridian has done, and kind of like pivoting all of its cultural programming and helping lead the way with IVLP online has been fantastic. The one actor I think that we overlooked, we were starting to do virtual, before the pandemic, but we really turned to Celia, to help with training for the network on virtual programming. And that there was mixed results there, mostly because our network likes meeting people in person. The new actor really I was like Zoom. I never had a Zoom account until all this, and here we are, and it's become such a mainstay in my life. But I think that it's really it's really it's not so much new actors as it is like the new thinking, and what I've been so impressed by is it's just the persistence, the doggedness to kind of keep making this better, to keep innovating and to keep making this work meaningful, and to rethink what exchanges really means. It's not just going to a place, it's experiencing and exchanging with people. And how do we do that better?
Catherine, you're at 11. Do you want to stop, or do you want to?
I can take one more question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, it's a quick one. One of the things that struck me about our society and what some of our foreign interlocutors may be thinking of us is the harsh divides across politics and values. And I am wondering whether a partnership with a group like Braver Angels that brings communities together in dialogue across those divisions might be something we might collectively aspire to. And I'll shut up now because I know Catherine has to go on to greater things.
No, thank you. Peter, Braver Angels, I'll look into them.
Or another group that fosters that kind of dialogue. They're interfaith groups, but Braver Angels is exemplary, and it's all over the country.
Right.
Great.
They're large.
Thank you.
Yeah. Braver Angels, and there are a large number of organizations that are engaging in this kind of dialogue across lines of difference within the United States. So yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Catherine.
Can I say one thing before Catherine leaves?
Yes,
please?
Liz.
Yeah. Hi, Catherine. Liz Colton here. I sent you a note, but your global ties, I've been following your Phoenix, Arizona group, and they have done remarkable work. I'm not in Phoenix, I'm in North Carolina right now. And they've done programs on Oaxaca and Vietnam most recently. And all of them brought in people from all over the world. They were fabulous. So I think, your hybrid programs are highly successful.
Thank you. Yeah, we are definitely moving towards, we're calling a return to in-person and also virtual, and we're trying to figure out how to keep the best of it, which eventually will become some kind of hybrid. But I agree, Global Ties Arizona has been fantastic, and I'm so happy you're plugged in with them. So yeah, thank you. You can learn about all of our members on our website, and you can click on their links and find who could be in your community. And I encourage you to stay in touch with them. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure, and I'm so sorry I have to drop off. I love to come back, maybe answer more questions later. So thank you so much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks,
sorry
Catherine.
about the complications earlier.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So to other questions that you guys have, feel free, by the way, this is also kind of a space for comment. It doesn't have to be just questions. A number of you had questions, actually a couple of you had questions about how we define family in our family diplomacy initiative. And so that is indeed a politically tricky question. The answer is we answer it very broadly, probably too broadly, at least at this point, which is as two or more people who love each other and are in a caring relationship. And that's explicitly, of course, in recognition of the fact that families are diversifying across the world. And so we want to be inclusive. We also recognize that that's going to alienate more conservative people who have a narrower conception of family. But part of our purpose is to get people to talk to each other across lines of difference and to recognize the growing diversity in the world. So we're just not going to shy away from realities. So that's the answer to it. And feel free to offer any comments for those of you who asked that question or other questions. Yes, Barbara.
Yeah, that just made me wonder. Do you? Yeah, obviously you don't really talk politics in any of these, and the whole idea is to broaden people's horizons. But I mean, do you have people from all what you would assume to be different political viewpoints participating in these meetings, ranging from conservative to liberal?
Yeah, so that's a really important question. And I think a perpetual challenge for anybody who's interested in real diversity. And what I mean by real diversity is not just racial diversity, gender diversity, and cross-national diversity, but class diversity, which is probably the hardest thing to accomplish is diversity across class, understood as, the people's essentially their education level, their income, and their occupation. The challenge is in part a technical one, that people with less education, income, and with occupations lower down the occupational scale are less likely to have cell phones and the internet, and therefore less likely to participate. And then they also are less likely to be inclined to participate and less equipped to participate culturally in the conversations, because these conversations drop all kinds of terms, whether we like it or not. Talking about, so for instance, Salia, who knows what Salia is? Most of you do, but I imagine, but other people across the world, certainly lower down the socioeconomic scale, have no idea what Salia is. And then, there are just terms like democracy and diplomacy that are just abstract terms that people lower down the socioeconomic scale can't necessarily comprehend fully or richly.
An acronym? I don't know.
So yeah, so it's a challenge, and the problem is in part that when we expand, we are generally getting people who are self-selecting into our dialogues. Even though we are making some efforts to reach people lower down the socioeconomic scale and certainly cross-nationally, but it's not easy. True diversity is not easy.
Paul, what is Salia? Is that an acronym?
No, it's the name of an organization based in the US that is, and others can feel free to chime in on this, but they're one of the early organizations in the United States that started international and have developed and professionalized international educational exchange virtually. So they focus on virtual international educational exchange, primarily classroom to classroom, student to student, and they are very interested in kind of professionalizing in the sense of making that interaction rigorous and rigorously researched.
Paul, could you spell it for us?
I put it in the Zoom chat, but it's
Oh, okay.
Soliya, Soliya.
YA.
Yeah,
'Cause
SOLIYA.
I got a catering company when I left the Y out. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and Peter, you asked a question about our funding. So we're largely donor funded donations. In fact, and by the way, if you wish to donate, we are. You can do so at learninglife.info. We're in the process of raising funds through the end of the year. But we've not actually applied for many grants, and we are this coming year going to be applying for more grants. We're aware of the Department of State Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, but have really not had much conversation with them about our work and how we might fit in. So, it's a conversation that we have to have with a variety of potential funders who might be interested in our work. I'm scrolling through the questions, but feel free, guys, to ask questions or comment on the presentations. Giles, you had a comment here, and I'm trying to see if you can figure, is Giles still with us? Yes, he is. Giles, if you could explain this comment you had about interesting and important based on Catherine and Paul's presentations to contrast digital with F2F modes of exchange, pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses of each. Face-to-face is F2F. Do you want to elaborate a little bit?
This is just something, thanks for raising this, Paul. It's just something that's intrigued me a lot as we've been moving into the digital era over the last couple of decades, to what extent exchanges maintain their added value. And I was really struck by your presentation, Paul, which is clearly based on linking communities principally through digital, because of course your whole aim is to bridge divides that without digital could not be overcome. And the kind of more traditional model of global ties, which is about that face-to-face hospitality. And it's interesting to follow the chat that there seems to be several of us feel some kind of hybrid model that makes use of both is probably the way to go. And it was interesting to listen to Catherine as well, that Global Ties is already making good use of hybrid, which I didn't actually know. So I find that very revealing. Thanks.
Yeah, to me, the pandemic has had a number of silver linings. And one of them is it's made people realize. I had a conversation, actually, I don't know, I had a conversation with a State Department person recently who told me they were surprised when the pandemic happened at just how many people participated in their online, previously in-person meetings. And so all these people across and so this is a clear benefit of online engagement, is a large number of people previously could not afford to participate were able to participate. So in terms of equity, if we're thinking about equity and inclusion, doing more online, so not going back to normal previously, because the normal previously is essentially classist, you might say, in the sense that the people who are more likely to be recruited, like IVLP, International Visitors Leadership Program, it's a fantastic program, but the criticism that can be leveled at it is that by identifying leaders, you're essentially identifying people who are part of, more or less, more often than not, part of the middle and the upper class. Rarely do people who are working class, lower middle class, working class, let alone the poor, get the opportunity to get paid by the State Department to come to the United States. And so if we're really serious about inclusion, I think that a movement towards a hybrid, not return to back to normal, but a movement towards a hybrid which uses the internet to open up more contacts to access more people, and then invites those that broader segment of the populations of different countries, I think is important.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, Barbara.
Yeah, because I'm a Global Ties board member, and actually my term is coming to an end at the end of this month. But one thing that I have been just incredibly impressed with is the fact that OIV managed to switch to virtual, pivot, and continue running IVOP programs. And one of the things that I think is going to come out of it in the end, and one thing that they learned from this, is that with using virtual, you can reach more people in more countries. So there's a lot of, smaller and poorer countries that might not have been able to, send an IVOP delegation here, and going forward, they could do virtual programming for that. So they can, that isn't necessarily hybrid per se, that would be continuing virtual, but offering it to IVOPs that people who couldn't have been IVOPs before, because there is a certain amount of money and a certain amount, each embassy, nominates people, that kind of thing. So I see that as a real silver lining. And I hope, as I said, my term on the board is ending. But I hope that, going forward, that this really happens, so that more people in smaller and maybe poorer countries who wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to come to the US will still get the opportunity to experience it virtually. And then another thing virtual will enable the programs that are going to come to the US to do in the future is do a lot of the programming that you usually get when you first come to DC, getting talked to by all these people about the government, blah, blah, blah. They can do that virtually, before they come, and then they can really hit the ground running and get more substantive, programming in their area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's Barbara. That's an important point about the pre and the post, right? That the virtual can serve as a preparation for in person, and it can serve as a way to sustain the in person afterwards. So those are.
Yeah, I think there's going to be more virtual work with alumni and that kind of thing going forward as well.
Just one before we move into kind of announcements, et cetera, and so forth. I'm wondering if Anand, who's joining us for the first time, you had a question, but also it would be great for you to introduce yourself and your organization. You're calling us from Spain, and it seems like you're doing interesting work. And you had a question about tolerance for difference. I think it's a semantic question about kind of the language that we're using. But yeah, if you could speak to that and then tell us about your work.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So I represent a new foundation which is bent on working on the concept and reality of citizen diplomacy, which is really a new concept in our area. You can visualize like northeast Spain, touching the border, the region of Catalonia, which is open to the Mediterranean, and with many exchanges to either Northern African countries, Maghreb, etc. So it's like an intercultural area per se, and citizen diplomacy feels like a natural thing. Actually, I will link this with my question about tolerance, because years ago, I had the pleasure of being the rapporteur for one of the Union of the Mediterranean meetings. And the subject of the meeting was about new educational leadership and democratic values. They were training leadership teams in schools, high schools, secondary, high school leaders into democratic values, more inclusive view of society, etc. And I didn't know that, but on my left side, I had the Foreign Affairs Minister of Egypt. And the spokesperson at the time started talking about tolerance in the Arab countries. And the Foreign Affairs Ministry whispered to my ear, I wish they were not talking about tolerance, because that simply means they're not going to kill each other. That was just a call, like an attention call to my mind. And since then, I realized that many times that may not be the case, but still I'm interested to know your view on the matter, which is beyond method, I think, is the interest in tolerance is based on, we imagine a positive reality, which is perhaps better described by talking about respect or appreciation, but we don't dare to actually measure it in these terms because they feel a little bit far-fetched in the face of the reality we may have in front of us. So we choose something which is rather a negative term, in the sense that this is not what is existing yet. So violence is not here, so we tolerate each other. This was the spirit behind the question. What is the interest in tolerance and not a more positive, so to say, aspect of the thing.
And Ananda, I hope that if you guys have a website, that you shared that to the Zoom, because it would be great to.
I will do so soon. It's under construction. It'll be our pleasure to share it soon with all of you. We will.
Yeah, so great question. And, quite briefly, I totally get you. I think that tolerance is reaching low. It's not aspiring high. And it's probably something will likely change in the future. It's not, by the way, in the survey questions that we ask. So the actual questions that we pose does not ask about tolerance. It's just a series of statements like, my country is the best country in the world. That kind of thing is something that a lot of Americans feel. And so this kind of sense of nationalism. And so we're looking for people's responses to statements that seem right, but are oftentimes kind of expressions of intolerance or of this kind of a problematic nationalism. And so so that's what essentially we're looking for. But yes, I should probably just use a different term when I refer to this this particular question.
Thanks, Paul.
We have one of our interns actually joining from Washington, D.C. Maddie Miller is joining from George Washington University. She had a class up until now, and so she's just joining us at the end, in part because she worked with me on the editing of, very kindly worked with me on the editing of the CD Bulletin. So this is the CD Bulletin, is the Citizen Diplomacy Bulletin, which we provide at every meeting, a new bulletin with updates on what's happening in the world of citizen diplomacy in terms of publication and opportunities and so on. And so she'll be presenting that momentarily. But I want to, before we close off the conversation, any other quick comments or thoughts or questions?
Paul, early on, this is Carson Taverner. You had asked me if I would comment on research work or citizen diplomacy work based on my comment about family and subnational. So I'll just quickly say that the Thai initiative defines subnational as states, cities, provinces, counties, universities, businesses, and nonprofits, which includes huge, huge communities. But it had never occurred to me that we could look at family as a subnational level of entity, because subnational, for what we're working on, is anything larger than, more organized than, and has more resources than an individual. I suppose the fact that families fundamentally are made up of individuals is why we would have otherwise kind of overlooked it, but we've definitely included very small groups in the concept of what is subnational. But there are increasing stories, especially among companies, where subnational level leadership, anything lacking sovereignty, is having a greater global impact than nations. And the nation state continues to be way, way above anybody's level of power, and always will as long as they have nuclear weapons. But relatively speaking, nation state power is on the decrease and subnational is on the increase. And I think families fit well into that mold. That's all I would say further about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Carson, the only thing I would add to that is it's worth looking at the World Value Survey. It is one of the largest surveys undertaken cross-nationally, and it's been since I think the late 1970s, and it's gradually increased the number of countries included. But the World Value Survey has a question where they ask, what is the most important relationship or institution in your life? Something like that. They probably don't use the word institution, but by far, across all these countries that are very diverse, the family is on top, and so it surpasses your friends, your work, your religion. Even people seem to value that. So the point being that the family has enormous cultural resonance across our lines of difference, and so it's a basis for not only engaging people across lines of difference, but popularizing diplomacy, right? If we can, I go back to this point about the comprehensibility of family versus, the United Nations and the pandemic and all these other complicated things in the world. Everybody more or less understands family. So it's a basis for a more open and diverse and rich conversation, I think, across.
Thank you so much. Again, that was Global Values Survey.
World Values Survey.
World
Values
Values
Survey.
Fantastic. We'll have to take a note of that.
Yeah.
Later, you and I can talk about family timelines. I've been doing that in my global studies classes, and it's a key element in helping my students feel like they are global citizens.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'd love to, but by all means, reach out
later.
to me about that.
Okay.
Julia, who's joining us, I believe, from Austria.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Paul,
Good to meet
for having me. Glad to be here. It's been a while. It was really interesting to hear your presentation and to sort of capture that idea of, looking at a family as an actor as well. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the choice of using the term or the concept of warmth in your surveys. And sort of how you define that or how you measured that, following sort of up to the discussion about choosing tolerance as well. I'd just be interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah, I'll be very brief because Debbie just kindly reminded me that we're close to the end here. There's look up feeling thermometer question or feeling thermometer, and you'll find that a variety of surveys use that as a kind of standard question where you basically just say, you ask people from 0 or from 1 to 100, how warm do you feel, or how warm or cold do you feel towards this particular population or group? And that's a common question used in research, and that's the one we use. So, all right, we are going to switch to announcements. Please, if you would, this is your time to kind of tell us what's going on in your work that you would like us to know about. But I'm going to preface things by having actually two things. I'm going to share. Debbie and I came up with a set of meetings. I just put them in the Zoom chat for next year. So if you want to put those in your schedule books, I would encourage you to do so. They are going to be on Wednesday, and I'm sorry for those of you who are European or else. It's month first, then day second, but that is Wednesday, the 9th of February. All of our meetings are an hour and a half long. Tuesday, the 5th of April, Wednesday, the June 8th, and Tuesday, August 9th, October 12th, Wednesday, October 12th, and Tuesday, December 6th. So next year, 6 meetings like this year, and please put them in your calendar. Maddie, I'm going to share my screen and allow you to talk a little bit about the Citizen Diplomacy Bulletin, and pull it up here.
Yeah, hi guys, my name is Madeline. I'm just going to be going through a few of the important findings that me and Paul compiled on the Citizen Diplomacy Research Bulletin. And starting off with the cover, we chose the 4th track, Diplomacy, Its Time Has Come. The gist of this article is talking about basically COVID-19, and the findings were that it characterized a need for a collaborative approach rather than competitive. And basically this collaborative approach would likely help to ensure that more resources reach the poorest parts of the world. And the end conclusion was basically, we need a new form of diplomacy, and what we're doing right now isn't working. So going on, in the news and announcements sections, a few things worth noting are the Carthage International Festival, taking place from mid-July to August, notable for various music and art exhibits. Additionally, Paul and intern Victoria have been compiling a list of citizen diplomacy organizations worldwide, and that's definitely worth taking a look at. It involves ordinary citizens engaging in cross-national dialogues. And we conclude that section with the Stevens Initiative, recent findings from the 2021 survey of the virtual exchange field. I would definitely recommend clicking here to learn more about that. And in the next section, we have news articles, reports, and videos. One article definitely worth taking a look at is the women's participation as agents of citizen diplomacy through solo international performing arts. I chose to highlight this one because last citizen diplomacy research meeting, I don't know how many of you attended, but we talked a lot about dance diplomacy. And it basically aims to explain women's participation as agents of citizen diplomacy by introducing Indonesian culture. And there are very interesting findings that incorporate the theories of citizen diplomacy and post-feminism. And the last link above the recent books, if you have time, it is an hour and 15-minute talk about China's soft power in Europe falling on hard times. It's a bunch of speakers from different think tanks presenting about interests of different European countries. I found it highly educational and informative. And finally, moving on to the recent books. One book that I would like to highlight is the China's Public Diplomacy. It was recently published within this year. It is based on in-depth case studies and provides a comprehensive analysis of the Chinese approach to public diplomacy. And according to the Clindale magazine, the Chinese approach to public diplomacy is characterized by a long-term vision, a dominant role for the government, an inseparable and complementary domestic dimension, and a high level of interconnectedness with China's overall foreign policy. And Paul and I basically decided to conclude the bulletin with resources of interest for citizen diplomats, students, and scholars of citizen diplomacy. Thank you.
Awesome, Maddie. The pages 4, 5, and 6 include some standard or oftentimes cited resources for citizen diplomats and students and scholars of citizen diplomacy and diplomacy writ large. So this will be shared with all of you via the email list, which I think you are all on, but if you're not, you should notify me and just send your email, put your email in the Zoom chat. Any other announcements? Giles.
Hi, thanks, Paul. Next week at the University of Sussex, there's an interesting conference on citizen diplomacy. Well, with recent COVID developments, the idea was that I was going to go to England and participate, and it will still be taking place in Sussex. But at the moment, I cannot say to what extent it's going to be digitally streamed. In other words, this is a last minute shift in the program. I know I will be delivering a paper digitally, but I don't know if anyone can access it from outside. However, there's a lot of interesting papers there, including a whole bunch from Israel, and the kind of role of citizen diplomats, particularly in peacekeeping. And this is a very interesting dimension of citizen diplomacy in the Israel-Palestine situation. So I'm looking forward to this very much, and there are definite publication plans. So more information to come after next week. Thanks.
Great, please do. Yeah, please share it. And I'll remind you all that we have a Facebook group and a LinkedIn group. If you're not part of those are other places where you can connect with others that are interested in citizen diplomacy worldwide, and where you can post your citizen diplomacy initiatives, research, questions, events, et cetera, and so forth. Any others?
Just to mention, Paul, on LinkedIn and I believe also on Facebook, the groups are co-branded with the Public Diplomacy Council, or PDC. So don't let that throw you off.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it's worth highlighting, we are an affinity group of the Public Diplomacy Council, which is a US-based nonprofit devoted to advancing public diplomacy. So, all right, everybody. It sounds like we are set, and we are just past 11:30. So to respect your time, thank you for your participation. For those of you who have just joined us for the first time, I'm particularly thinking of Maha Tambal. I'm glad you joined us. Anand, glad you joined us. Constance, I'm not sure if we have I can't remember if you've come to a previous meeting, but I'm glad you're
I
great.
did. I already attended one. Actually, I was in Sudan and I didn't maintain any stable internet to connect constantly with you. But now I'm based in DC doing my Fulbright scholarship here in the States.
Fantastic. Glad you're in DC. Hope you get a lot out of it. And glad you're with us again. Okay, everybody. Thanks for your time, and see you next year. Happy holidays and happy New Year. Happier, we hope. All right, everybody.
Likewise. Thank you.
Bye.